Daisy's hand trembled as she reached for the chrome door handle, 43 floors above the Thames. Inside, Sada Ning, the man who'd made 3 executives cry this month, was waiting. She'd memorized every article about him. Youngest Korean-British CEO in fintech, inherited his father's empire at 27, expanded it tenfold in 5 years. Cold. Brilliant. Impossible. Her sister's medical bills sat like stones in her pocket, folded receipts she couldn't pay. This job was her last shot before their family lost everything. Through the glass wall, she saw him, tall, severe, beautiful in the way sharp things are beautiful. He looked up. Their eyes met. Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of recognition that made no sense because they'd never met. She pushed the door open. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice crisp British vowels with something harder underneath. "You're exactly on time." How boring. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. That was her first mistake, or maybe her first smart move. The office was a shrine to minimalism and money. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a steel-gray sky, and everything inside, the furniture, the art, the man behind the desk, seemed designed to intimidate. Daisy's heels clicked against marble as she crossed to the chair he indicated with a slight movement of his hand. She'd worn her best interview suit, navy blue with a crisp white shirt, her natural hair pulled into a neat bun. Professional. Unthreatening. Competent. Sada Ning didn't stand to greet her. He remained behind his desk, tablet in hand, barely glancing up as she sat. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year, his black hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, sharp cheekbones, intense dark eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "You've had 4 personal assistants in the past 6 months, Daisy said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammered. 3 quit within weeks. 1 lasted 2 months before requesting a transfer to the Edinburgh office." Now he did look at her. Really looked. His eyes were calculating, measuring her like she was a column of numbers that might or might not add up. "You researched me. I research everything. And yet you still came." Something almost like amusement crossed his face. Almost. Brave or desperate? "Determined," Daisy said, meeting his gaze even though everything in her wanted to look away. Her palms were slick with sweat. She pressed them against her portfolio to keep them still. "I don't quit, Mr. Ning. Not when something matters." He set down his tablet. "Tell me, Miss Williams, what matters enough to walk into what you clearly know is a professional nightmare?" The question was cruel in its directness. Most interviewers danced around personal circumstances. Sada Ning apparently didn't dance at all. "My family," she said simply. "And I'm good at what I do." "Very good. Your previous assistants weren't failures, you're simply difficult to work with." But difficulty isn't the same as impossible. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached across his desk and slid a folder toward her. "You have 7 minutes to reorganize the contents of this file into a coherent brief for tomorrow's board meeting. The material is deliberately chaotic. Most people can't complete it in under 20 minutes. Begin." Daisy's hands shook as she opened the folder. Inside was a disaster, contracts mixed with financial projections, legal documents shuffled with marketing proposals, post-it notes with cryptic abbreviations stuck to random pages. It was a test designed to break someone under pressure. She took a breath. Then another. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "You're brilliant, baby girl. Don't let anyone make you forget it." 6 minutes and 40 seconds later, she slid the reorganized brief back across the desk. Color-coded tabs marked each section. A 1-page executive summary sat on top, highlighting the 3 critical decision points for the board. Supporting documents followed in logical order, with her handwritten notes flagging potential concerns. Sada Ning picked up the brief. His eyes scanned the pages, and for the first time since she'd entered, his expression betrayed genuine surprise. He looked at the executive summary, then at her, then back at the documents. "How did you?" He stopped himself. Shook his head slightly. "You've worked in finance before." "Corporate law, actually. I was a paralegal at Morrison Webb for 3 years before." She hesitated. "Before her sister got sick." Before the insurance denials and the mounting debt. Before she'd had to leave a job she loved because the hours didn't pay enough to cover what her family needed. Before I decided I needed a change. You're overqualified for this position. I'm exactly qualified for it, Daisy corrected, surprised by her own boldness. You need someone who thinks like you do. Fast. Precise. Someone who can anticipate problems before they become disasters. Your previous assistants were competent administrators. But you don't need an administrator, Mr. Ning. You need a strategic partner. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of something vast. Sada Ning leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She forced herself to breathe normally, to hold his gaze, to project confidence she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. The hours are brutal, he said finally. I work from 6 in the morning until midnight most days. I travel constantly. I have no patience for mistakes, excuses, or emotional displays. I require absolute discretion. What happens in this office, on business trips, in private meetings, stays private. I pay extremely well because I demand perfection. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Miss Williams? This job will consume your life. My life is already consumed, Daisy said quietly. At least this way it'll be by something that pays enough to matter. Another long look. Then Sada Ning stood, extending his hand across the desk. You start Monday. 6 a.m. sharp. We have a merger call with Tokyo at 6:30. If you're even 30 seconds late, you're fired. Understood. Daisy rose on shaking legs, gripping his hand. His palm was warm, his handshake firm but brief. Professional. Understood. Good. He released her hand and turned back to his window, dismissing her. Send in my next candidate on your way out. There won't be a next candidate, Daisy said, surprising herself again. You've already decided. He didn't turn around, but she saw his reflection in the window, the smallest curve of his mouth, there and gone like a ghost. Efficiency is the only thing I value, Miss Williams. Do not make me regret this. On Monday morning at 5:47 a.m., Daisy stepped out of the elevator into the dim quiet of the executive floor. She'd barely slept, spending the weekend researching Ning Industries' current projects, memorizing names and faces of key personnel, studying Sada's management style through every article and interview she could find. The man was a puzzle. Born and sold to a Korean father and British-Korean mother, raised in London after his father relocated the company headquarters when Sada was 8. He'd attended Oxford, double majoring in economics and computer science, graduated at the top of his class. His father died in a car accident when Sada was 27, and rather than crumble under the weight of inheriting a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, he'd transformed it. Made it sharper, leaner, more ruthless. He had no social media presence, no public relationships, no hobbies or interests documented anywhere. One interview described him as a man who married his work and never looked back. The lights in his office were already on. Daisy smoothed her pencil skirt, black today, paired with the emerald silk blouse that her mother had insisted made her skin glow, and pushed through the glass doors. Sada stood at his window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. He glanced at her, noted the time on his watch, and gave her a single nod of acknowledgement before returning to his conversation. Daisy set down her bag and got to work. His desk was already buried in documents that hadn't been there Friday. She began sorting urgent versus important, time-sensitive versus strategic, creating order from chaos with practiced efficiency. The Tokyo call lasted 90 minutes. Daisy took notes, flagged critical points, and when Sada referenced a contract clause that wasn't immediately visible on screen, she had the relevant document pulled up and highlighted before he finished his sentence. When the call ended, he turned to her. Coffee. Black. And the Morrison file, I need the updated terms before my 9 o'clock. Already on your desk, sir. Updated terms highlighted in yellow. Legal's concerns in blue. My recommendations in green. He picked up the file, flipped through it. Something flickered in his expression. You came in early. 5:47, Daisy confirmed. I wanted to familiarize myself with the space and review your calendar before we began. The day begins at 6. Then I was 13 minutes early. She met his eyes. Is that a problem? No. He set down the file. But don't expect praise for exceeding baseline expectations. This, he gestured at the organized desk, the prepared files, is what I hired you to do. I don't work for praise, Mr. Ning, Daisy said. I work for results. For just a moment, something warm crossed his face. Approval, maybe? Or recognition. Then it vanished behind his usual mask of cool efficiency. Good. Then let's get through this week without you crying in the bathroom like assistant number 3. I don't cry in bathrooms, Daisy said. When I cry, I do it at home where no one can see. He looked at her sharply, as if trying to determine whether she was joking. She kept her expression neutral, professional. Let him wonder. The Evans Group presentation is Thursday, he said, moving on. I need you to rebuild the entire deck. The current version is garbage. You have until Wednesday at noon. Consider it done. Thus began the hardest year of Daisy's life. Sada Ning was exactly as advertised, demanding, exacting, seemingly incapable of satisfaction. He worked 14-hour days and expected her to match his pace. He never raised his voice, which somehow made his displeasure more cutting. A slight tightening around his eyes. A pause before responding. Silence where praise might have lived. But Daisy learned his language. Learned to read the microscopic shifts in his expression, the way his jaw tightened when he was frustrated, the particular quality of quiet that meant he was impressed but would never say so. She learned he took his coffee black in the morning, with a single sugar after 3 p.m. when his energy flagged. Learned he hated small talk but would discuss philosophy, history, or economics for hours if prompted correctly. Learned he played piano, heard him once, late at night when he thought the office was empty, the distant sound of something classical and melancholy drifting from the executive lounge. And slowly, carefully, Daisy began to see past the Ice King exterior to the man underneath. The one who anonymously donated millions to children's hospitals. Who personally called every employee who had a family emergency. Who remembered birthdays and asked after sick relatives in his stiff, awkward way. He was lonely, she realized. Profoundly, deliberately lonely. As if he'd decided that isolation was safer than connection, that control was more valuable than warmth. It made her ache for him, which was dangerous. She was his assistant. Nothing more. But 3 months in, something shifted. They were working late again on a Friday night. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. Rain drummed against the windows, turning the city below into a blur of lights and motion. Daisy had kicked off her heels under her desk, too tired to care about professionalism. You should go home, Sada said suddenly. He stood at his window, tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled up. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him. It's nearly 11. You're still here. I live here. He meant it as a joke, but there was truth underneath. You have a life. Do I? Daisy laughed, but it came out bitter. I wake up, come here, work, go home, sleep, repeat. My friends have stopped inviting me out. My sister asks if I remember what she looks like. This job is my life now, Mr. Ning. Just like you said it would be. He turned from the window. And do you regret it? The question was softer than his usual directness. Almost tentative. Daisy considered lying. But she was too tired, and he was looking at her in a way that made her feel seen, really seen, for the first time in months. No, she said honestly. I'm good at this. And it's saving my family. My sister's in remission now. My parents might actually get to retire. So no, I don't regret it. She paused. But sometimes I miss being a person instead of a professional. Sada was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed her desk and did something unprecedented. He sat on the edge of it, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and expensive. I forget, he said quietly, that other people need things I don't. Human things. Connection. Joy. Rest. What do you need? Daisy asked before she could stop herself. His eyes met hers, dark and intense and suddenly vulnerable in a way that made her breath catch. I have no idea. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unnamed. Daisy's heart hammered. She should look away. Should stand up, put professional distance between them, remember that he was her boss and she was his assistant, and this, whatever this was, couldn't happen. But she didn't move. Neither did he. Daisy, he said, using her first name for the first time ever. It sounded different in his voice. Intimate. Thank you. For staying. For being excellent. For. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. For being here. Then he stood abruptly, the moment shattering like glass. Go home. That's in order. I'll see you Monday. Daisy gathered her things in silence, her hands shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with nerves. As she reached the elevator, she glanced back. Sada stood at his window again, hands in his pockets, looking out at the rain-soaked city like a king surveying a kingdom that brought him no joy. She wanted to go back. Wanted to touch his shoulder, say something that would ease the loneliness radiating from him like cold. Instead, she stepped into the elevator and went home. But something had changed. They both knew it. The next 6 months were torture disguised as professionalism. Every meeting felt charged. Every accidental touch, his hand brushing hers as he passed her a document, their shoulders bumping in the back of a town car, the time she'd had to straighten his tie before a major presentation, and felt his pulse jumping under her fingertips, sent electricity through her entire body. Daisy told herself it was one-sided, that she was reading too much into small moments. Sada was her boss. A billionaire. Korean-British royalty in the business world. And she was his assistant. A black woman from South London who'd clawed her way up from nothing. They existed in different universes that happened to overlap in a glass office 43 floors above reality. But sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression that made her stomach drop. Hungry. Conflicted. Like he was fighting the same battle she was. They never discussed that Friday night. Never referenced the shift between them. But it lived in every silence, every careful maintenance of professional distance that felt more intimate than touching. The annual Investors' Gala arrived in early autumn. Ning Industries' biggest event of the year, a black tie affair where Sada would schmooze with shareholders, charm potential partners, and project absolute control over his empire. You'll need to attend, he told her 2 weeks before. They were in his office reviewing the guest list. I'll need someone there who knows the players, can brief me between conversations, keep me on schedule. I don't have anything appropriate to wear to something like that, Daisy said honestly. The ticket price alone was probably more than her monthly salary. Company expense. Harrods. Tomorrow at 3. My treat. He said it casually, not looking up from his tablet. Charge everything to my personal account. Mr. Ning. It's not a gift, Miss Williams. It's a uniform. You wouldn't show up to the office in jeans, would you? This is simply a different kind of work. But it felt like more than that when Daisy stood in front of the mirror in Harrod's private dressing room, wrapped in midnight blue silk that clung to every curve she usually hid under boxy blazers. The dress was elegant, sophisticated, and made her feel like someone she didn't quite recognize. Someone beautiful. Powerful. The saleswoman clasped a delicate diamond necklace around her throat, also on Sada's account, though Daisy had protested until the woman explained it was standard for executive assistants to borrow jewelry for major company events. Borrow, Daisy reminded herself firmly. This was all borrowed. The dress, the diamonds, the proximity to a world that wasn't hers. The night of the gala, Sada picked her up personally. His driver pulled up outside her flat in Brixton, and Daisy's neighbors actually stopped to stare as she emerged in her borrowed finery. Sada was waiting in the back of the car, devastating in a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of an old film. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he saw her. Miss Williams. His voice was carefully neutral, but his gaze traced over her in a way that made her skin heat. You look professional, she supplied, sliding into the seat beside him. Dangerous, he said quietly. Then, louder, the dress is acceptable. Good choice. They rode in silence through London's glittering streets. Daisy was hyper-aware of him beside her, the way his cologne filled the small space, the occasional brush of his leg against hers when the car turned, the way he kept almost looking at her and then forcing his attention elsewhere. The gala was everything she'd imagined and nothing she'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, women in gowns that cost more than cars, men in tuxedos discussing mergers like poetry. Daisy felt simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, the only black woman in a sea of white faces, clinging to Sada's side like a shadow. But she knew her job. Whispered names and crucial details as investors approached. Reminded him of talking points, family connections, strategic priorities. Ran interference when conversations dragged too long. Fetched drinks, sent texts, managed his schedule with invisible precision. "You're good at this," Sada murmured during a rare moment alone. They stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching couples drift across the dance floor. Reading people. Knowing what they need before they ask. "It's what you pay me for." "Is it?" He turned to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. But it wasn't quite an order either. Something in between. "I don't think that's a good idea," Daisy said, even as her body betrayed her by swaying toward him. "Neither do I." He held out his hand anyway. "Dance with me." The waltz was torture. His hand at the small of her back, burning through silk. Her palm in his, their fingers intertwined. They moved together with the same precision they brought to work, perfectly synchronized, anticipating each other's movements, a partnership that looked effortless but required constant attention. "Everyone's watching us," Daisy murmured. And they were. She could feel eyes on them from every corner, some curious, some calculating, some openly disapproving. A Korean-British billionaire and his black assistant, dancing like they were the only people in the room. "Let them watch." Sada's voice was low, meant only for her. "You belong here as much as anyone." "Do I?" She looked up at him. "Or am I just playing dress-up in a world that will never really accept me?" His hand tightened at her waist. "If they don't accept you, they're fools." "You didn't answer the question." "Yes," he said quietly. "You belong here. Not because of the dress or the diamonds or because you're on my arm. But because you're brilliant and competent and you command respect simply by existing. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." Something cracked open in Daisy's chest. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that she was more than her circumstances, more than the girl from Brixton who'd fought for every opportunity. Wanted to believe that when he looked at her, he saw someone equal rather than someone useful. The music ended. They stood frozen for a moment too long, his hand still at her back, her palm still in his. Then someone called his name, and the spell broke. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne and careful professionalism. But something had shifted again. Deepened. Like they'd crossed an invisible line and couldn't figure out how to get back. At midnight, Sada insisted on riding with her back to Brixton. The driver pulled up outside her building, shabby compared to where they'd been, but home nonetheless. "Thank you," Daisy said, gathering her clutch. "For the dress." "The evening." "It was." "Daisy." He stopped her with a hand on her arm. "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "Mr. Ning." "Sada," he corrected. "When it's just us, call me Sada." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I find myself thinking about you at inappropriate times," he said, the words precise, but the admission vulnerable. "During meetings. Late at night. First thing in the morning. I find myself looking for you even when I know exactly where you are. This isn't." He struggled. "This isn't professional. And I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what's happening here." Daisy's mouth went dry. "What is happening here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I've never felt this way about anyone. And I know that crossing this line would be the most unprofessional thing I've ever done. So I'm telling you now, as clearly as I can, I won't pursue this. I won't put you in a position where you feel pressured or obligated. Your job is safe regardless of how you respond to what I just said." She should have felt relieved. Should have been grateful for his restraint, his professionalism, his consideration of the power imbalance between them. Instead, she felt disappointed. And that disappointment told her everything she needed to know about her own feelings. "What if I want you to pursue it?" she whispered. Sada's expression shuddered. "Daisy, what if I think about you too? What if I lie awake wondering what it would be like? What if I've been fighting the same battle you have for months now? The words tumbled out, reckless and true. What if the only reason I haven't said anything is because I was afraid you'd fire me? I would never. I know, she interrupted. I know that now. Because you just proved it. You just told me my job is safe. So let me be honest too, I want this. Whatever this is. I want to find out what happens when we stop pretending there's nothing between us. Sada closed his eyes, jaw tight with restraint. If we do this, everything changes. Everything already changed, Daisy said. We've just been pretending it hasn't. He opened his eyes, and the heat in them made her stomach flip. I need time to think about this. About how to do it right. I won't rush into something that could hurt you. And what about something that could hurt you? She challenged. A ghost of a smile. I'm not sure I know how to be hurt anymore. Then let me teach you, Daisy said softly. She left him in the car, trembling with adrenaline and terror and anticipation. She didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if she'd just made the bravest or stupidest decision of her life. But she knew she couldn't go back to pretending. Not anymore. 3 weeks later, they flew to Paris for a crucial merger negotiation. Ning Industries was acquiring a French tech startup, and Sada needed to personally oversee the final terms. Daisy had coordinated the entire trip, flights, hotel, meeting schedules, backup plans for the backup plans. They landed at Charles de Gaulle at 7 in the evening, exhausted from a long day of work before the flight. The plan was to check into their hotel, review documents over dinner, and sleep before tomorrow's marathon session with the French CEO and his legal team. But Paris had other plans. An hour after landing, as they waited in the lobby of the Four Seasons George V, Sada's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression darkened. When did this happen? Pause. How bad? Another pause, longer. I see. Yes. No. Tell them I'll be there as soon as possible. He hung up and turned to Daisy. The London office had a security breach. Someone accessed confidential client data. I need to fly back immediately. There's a flight at 11, Daisy said, already pulling up options on her phone. I can have you on it. What about tomorrow's meeting? You'll handle it. She looked up sharply. What? You know these terms as well as I do. Better, maybe. You've sat in every negotiation. You understand the stakes. His eyes met hers. I trust you. Those 3 words carried more weight than anything else he could have said. Sada Ning didn't trust easily. Didn't delegate critical tasks. But he was trusting her with $1 billion deal. I won't let you down, she promised. I know. He squeezed her shoulder, brief, professional, but warm. I'll be back as soon as I can. A day, maybe 2. The hotel has your reservation. Order whatever you need from room service. And Daisy? He paused at the door. Be brilliant. I know you will be. Then he was gone, and Daisy was alone in Paris with a merger hanging in the balance and the sudden, strange realization that she'd spent nearly every day for the past year with Sada Ning. That his absence felt like missing a limb. She threw herself into preparation. Reviewed documents until her eyes burned. Rehearsed talking points. Studied the French CEO's background, looking for angles, common ground, potential sticking points. The next day's meeting went better than she'd dared hope. The French CEO, a sharp-eyed woman named Isabelle Laurent, seemed amused by Sada's absence and impressed by Daisy's competence. They negotiated for 7 hours straight, breaking only for lunch and coffee. By the time they shook hands at 6 p.m., they'd reached terms that were favorable to both parties. Daisy called Sada immediately. We have a deal. Tell me everything. She walked him through it, the concessions, the compromises, the strategic wins. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there was silence on the line. Sada, you're remarkable, he said quietly. Do you know that? Truly remarkable. Her chest tightened. I learned from the best. No, this is all you. Your skill. Your instinct. Your excellence. He paused. I'm still in London. The breach is worse than we thought. It'll be at least 2 more days before I can leave. 2 days. Daisy's heart sank. Okay, I can fly back tonight, help manage. Stay, he interrupted. You've earned it. Take the weekend. See Paris. Charge everything to the company card. Consider it a bonus. I don't need a bonus. Daisy. His voice softened. Take the weekend. That's an order from your unreasonably demanding boss who is grateful beyond words for what you just accomplished. So she stayed. Wandered the Louvre, climbed the Eiffel Tower, sat in a cafe in Montmartre drinking wine and eating cheese and feeling, for the first time in a year, like a person rather than a position. But it felt wrong without him. She kept turning to make a comment and finding empty space. Kept imagining how he'd react to things: the art, the architecture, the street musicians. Sunday evening, her phone rang. I'm in Paris, Sada said without preamble. Lobby bar. Whenever you're ready. Daisy's heart stopped. She looked down at herself, jeans and a sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, no makeup. Give me 20 minutes. No. His voice was firm. Come as you are. I don't need the professional version right now. I just need you. She found him at a corner table, still in his suit but tie-less, looking exhausted and beautiful and like everything she'd been trying not to want for months. He stood when he saw her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You came, she said unnecessarily. I've been trying to stay away, he admitted. For your sake. For professionalism. For all the rational reasons why this is a terrible idea. He took a step closer. And then I realized that the security breach was handled hours ago. That I'd delegated everything to my team. That there was no actual reason for me to stay in London except fear. Fear of what? Of this. He gestured between them. Of wanting someone so badly it makes me stupid. Of realizing that I've built an empire and filled it with everything except what actually matters. Daisy's throat tightened. What matters? You, he said simply. You matter. And I'm terrified of ruining it. Of abusing my power. Of making you feel like you have to reciprocate because I'm your boss and your livelihood depends on me being happy with you. Is that what you think? Daisy stepped closer, closing the distance between them. That I would kiss you out of professional obligation? His eyes darkened. Daisy. Because I wouldn't, she continued. I wouldn't touch you because you pay my salary. I wouldn't want you because you're my boss. I would do those things because I can't stop thinking about you. Because you're brilliant and frustrating and lonely in a way that makes me ache. Because when you trust me with something important, I feel like I could conquer the world. We'd have to be careful, he said, but he was moving toward her now, inexorable as gravity. The company has policies. The board would have opinions. The press. I don't care about any of that, Daisy said. Do you? Yes, he admitted. Because it would affect you more than me. Because you're black and I'm Korean and people will have vile things to say about us. Because the power dynamic is real and I won't pretend it isn't. Then what do we do? Sada reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. We proceed with caution. With intention. We acknowledge the risks and decide they're worth it anyway. And we. Daisy kissed him. Pulled him down by his collar and pressed her mouth to his, swallowing whatever careful, rational thing he'd been about to say. For a moment he froze. Then he kissed her back with a hunger that made her knees weak, his hands coming up to cradle her face like she was something precious. They broke apart, breathing hard. The bar was nearly empty, but a few patrons were definitely staring. Daisy didn't care. My room or yours, she whispered. Yours is closer, Sada said, and the heat in his voice sent fire through her veins. They barely made it through the door before they were kissing again, desperate and clumsy and perfect. Daisy had imagined this moment 100 times, always pictured herself nervous, uncertain, deferential. The professional assistant even in bed. But the moment the door closed, something shifted in her. All the careful control she maintained at work, all the restraint, all the second-guessing herself, it vanished. And in its place was the woman she'd always been underneath. Confident. Powerful. Unafraid. She pushed Sada against the wall, claiming his mouth with a fierceness that made him groan. His hands were in her hair on her waist, pulling her closer like he couldn't get enough. Daisy, he breathed against her lips. Are you sure? Stop talking, she commanded, and watched his eyes go dark with want. What followed was a revelation. Sada had spent months projecting control, dominance, absolute authority. But behind closed doors, he yielded to her like he'd been waiting for permission to surrender. She discovered he was ticklish along his ribs, that he made the most incredible sounds when she bit his shoulder, that he whispered to her in Korean when he lost control of his words. And Daisy discovered that she liked being in charge, liked reducing her impossible boss to incoherent need, liked the way he looked at her like she was a goddess instead of an employee. Hours later, tangled in expensive sheets with Paris glittering outside the window, Sada traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "You've been hiding this from me," he said, voice rough with satisfaction and something deeper. "Hiding what?" "This version of you. Confident. Dominant. Absolutely devastating." He propped himself on one elbow, looking down at her with something like wonder. "The timid assistant was a mask." "Not a mask," Daisy corrected. "Just one part of me. You needed a professional, so that's what I gave you. But here, in private, I can be everything else too." "I want both," he said fiercely. "The brilliant assistant and the fierce woman. I want all of you." "That's a lot to ask for," Daisy teased, but her heart was pounding. "Then let me offer something in return." He sat up, suddenly serious. "I want you to quit." Daisy froze. "What?" "Not working with me," he clarified quickly. "But working for me. I want you as my partner, not my employee. I want to marry you." She stared at him. "You're proposing?" "After one night." "I've been falling for you for a year," Sada said. "Tonight just made it official. But I know how this looks. I know people will say I'm taking advantage. That you felt obligated. So here's what I'm offering, a contract. A marriage that's strategic on the surface, but real in every way that matters. I'll pay you $1 billion, your own money, completely independent of me. You'll have security regardless of whether we work out. And in return, you give me this." He gestured at the rumpled bed, at her. "This version of you that only I get to see. This partnership. This excellence. You want to marry me for sex?" Daisy said, trying to process. "No." He cupped her face. "I want to marry you because you're my equal in every way that matters. Because you make me want to be more than the Ice King everyone thinks I am. Because when I look at my future, I can't imagine it without you in it." He paused. "The fact that you're extraordinary in bed is just a bonus I intend to enjoy as often as possible." Daisy's mind raced. It was insane. They'd only just crossed from professional to personal. A marriage contract was absurd. But it was also perfectly Sada. Strategic. Protective of her interests. Clear in its terms. And underneath the business language, it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever offered her. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Then you remain my assistant, if you want. We continue as we were before tonight. I'll be disappointed, but I'll respect your decision." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But I hope you'll say yes. I hope you'll take a chance on the possibility that this could be extraordinary." $1 billion, Daisy said slowly. "That's real. Your family would never struggle again. Your sister's medical bills would be nothing. You could invest, travel, start your own company if you wanted. You'd have complete freedom. And what would you get out of it?" "You," he said simply. "In every way. As my wife. My partner. The woman who challenges me and matches me and sometimes, like tonight, completely unmakes me." He smiled, rare and genuine. "I'm a selfish man, Daisy. I don't want to share this with anyone else. The moment I saw what you're like when the professional mask comes off, I knew I could never let another man experience it. It should have felt possessive. Maybe it was. But Daisy found she didn't mind. Because she felt the same way. The thought of Sada with someone else, of him surrendering his careful control to another woman, made her want to tear the world apart. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely." He kissed her forehead. "But most worthwhile things are. I need time to think. Take whatever you need." He settled back against the pillows, pulling her into his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." They stayed in Paris for 2 more days. Daisy told Sada she needed time to consider, and he respected that, didn't pressure, didn't mention the proposal again. Instead, they explored the city together. He held her hand in the Tuileries garden, bought her macarons from La Durée, took her to a tiny jazz club in the Latin Quarter, and pulled her close on a crowded dance floor. And Daisy watched him transform. The Ice King melted into someone warmer. Easier. He laughed, an actual, genuine laugh, when she tried to speak French to a shopkeeper and accidentally asked for a horse instead of a handbag. He fed her strawberries at a cafe and didn't care who saw. He kissed her on a bridge over the Seine as the sun set and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be alive." By the time they boarded the flight back to London, Daisy had her answer. "Yes," she said, somewhere over the English Channel. Sada looked up from his tablet. "Yes, I'll marry you. On one condition. Anything. It can't just be about what happens behind closed doors," Daisy said. "I want a real marriage. Messy and complicated and full of all the human things you've been avoiding. I want you to let me in completely. Not just your bed, your life. Your fears. Your hopes. Everything." Something vulnerable crossed his face. "I don't know if I know how to do that." "Then learn," she said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "Let me teach you." He kissed her there in first class, with the flight attendant discreetly looking away and the clouds streaming past the window. "Deal," he murmured against her lips. The wedding happened 3 months later. They kept it relatively small despite the public interest, 200 guests at a historic manor house in the Cotswolds. The press called it a fairy tale. The business world called it a strategic alliance. Sada's associates called it surprising. Daisy's family called it a miracle. Daisy wore white silk that made her skin glow, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo with tiny diamonds woven through the curls. Sada wore a custom tuxedo and looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "You're sure about this?" her sister whispered before the ceremony. "I mean, I know he's rich and hot, but are you happy?" Daisy thought about it. About the marriage contract sitting in her bank vault, ensuring her financial independence. About the way Sada had slowly opened up over the past months, sharing his childhood fears, his grief over his father, his terror of being alone. About how he'd flown her entire family to Seoul to meet his mother, who'd cried and hugged Daisy and said she was the best thing that ever happened to her son. About the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of illusions. "Yeah," she said. "I'm happy." The ceremony was traditional with personal touches. They wrote their own vows. Sada's were precise and earnest, promising partnership, respect, and endless cups of black coffee delivered exactly when she needed them. Daisy's were fierce and honest, promising to challenge him, support him, and never let him retreat into isolation again. When they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause. But Daisy barely heard it. She was too focused on the man holding her, the one who'd been impossible to please, and had somehow decided she was exactly what he needed. The reception was elegant chaos. Speeches and dancing and champagne. Daisy's mother sobbed happily into her father's shoulder. Sada's business partners looked shell-shocked but congratulatory. A few tabloid reporters lurked at the edges, documenting the unlikely match. But as the evening wound down and they finally escaped to the bridal suite, the public performance fell away. Sada locked the door and turned to her, and Daisy saw the mask slip. Saw the vulnerable, hungry man underneath the billionaire CEO. "Hello, husband," she said, smiling. "Hello, wife." He crossed to her, cupping her face. "I need to tell you something." "Now? We have better things to." "I love you," he interrupted. "I should have said it before. In my vows. 100 times over the past months. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think it was just infatuation or possession or something less than what it is." His thumb brushed her cheek. "But it's real. I love you, Daisy. Your brilliance. Your fire. Your kindness. The way you refuse to let me hide. I love all of it." Daisy's eyes stung with tears. "I love you too. Even though you're impossibly demanding and you work too hard and you sometimes forget that other people need sleep." He laughed against her mouth. "I'll work on that." "Good." She pulled him toward the bed. "Because your wife has some very specific demands, and they start with you forgetting about work for the next 48 hours. Is that an order, Mrs. Ning?" "It absolutely is, Mr. Ning." And for once in his life, Sada Ning followed instructions without argument. The next morning, Daisy woke wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets and her husband's arms. Sunlight streamed through the windows, gilding everything in gold. Sada was already awake, watching her with that soft expression he only wore in private. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. "That I spent years building an empire," he said quietly. "And none of it mattered until I found someone to share it with." "That's very romantic for the Ice King. You melted me." He kissed her forehead, completely and irreversibly. Daisy smiled against his chest. "Good. Because you're stuck with me now." "Best contract I ever signed," Sada said. They stayed in bed for hours, talking and touching and planning a future that looked nothing like either of them had imagined. Eventually, they'd have to face the world, the press, the company, the endless questions about how a billionaire CEO fell for his assistant. People would speculate, judge, reduce their love to stereotypes and scandals. But in that moment, wrapped in each other and morning light, none of it mattered. They'd found something real in a world of transactions. Something excellent behind closed doors that was worth every risk, every raised eyebrow, every challenge ahead. Daisy had walked into Sada Ning's office a year ago trembling and desperate. She'd left as his wife, his partner, his equal in every way that counted. And if the world wanted to know the secret to their success, the truth was simple. They'd both been excellent all along. They just needed each other to prove it.